Hey there, everyone. Welcome back. As people are starting to trickle in, this is our last session of the day. I said in the last session that it's bittersweet. Bitter because we've been thinking about this for a long time, and it's finally here, and now it's almost over. Just means we have to start planning for the next one. But also sweet because we've learned so much. The sessions have been so well attended. I've been taking lots of notes, and based on the engagement and the questions coming out of the conversations in the chat and in the Q&A, it seems like everyone here is enjoying this as well. So if you're enjoying the day, if you've enjoyed the sessions and the speakers, throw your favorite emoji or GIF inside of the chat. Let us know through the visuals what you've thought of the day so far. And as you're coming in, again, if this is your first session and you're waking up like Paul is on the other side of the world, then let us know where you are calling in from, what you're hoping to get out of this session. Maybe you've seen Paul online, maybe you've gone through his courses, maybe you're one of his clients, and that's why you're here today. But I want to introduce Paul to the stage. Paul Miners is a productivity specialist, Asana expert, Pipedrive partner, Zapier expert as well. And Paul and I have known each other for about a year now, like officially. I've known about Paul a lot longer. We were on each other's podcasts, and I admitted to him last year when I think he was on my show that when I was starting out and wanting to learn about Asana, I was watching all of his videos. So mostly everything I know, I learned from Paul. And it was actually Paul that inspired me to start my YouTube channel on Asana demos and things like that, because he was showing people how he worked and how he solved problems for his customers. And I had questions for my customers, and I wanted to answer those in a public forum. So Paul, thank you for inspiring me and inspiring so many others. And I'm literally here today because you put videos on YouTube and enable me to learn. So thanks so much.
Thank you. No, you're too kind. Thank you for having me and for putting this together. And I think that's just the world we live in now. I sort of pinch myself every day that I get to wake up and like connect with people all over the world and help them with this tool Asana, which I actually was kind of self-taught. I sort of just figured it out on my own, and it's pretty cool that we get to do this as a job and just help people all over the world. So I think it's I think we're both very fortunate. But thank you again for putting this together. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to start with some slides, and maybe Marquis, you can just confirm for me that this is working.
Sure.
Okay, how's that?
Looks like it's working. If you want to go full screen, let's check that out.
If I make the window, how's that?
Oh, yeah, that's good. That works.
If I resize, there we go. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining. So today, for this final session, I'm going to be focusing on using Asana as a communication tool, how to make it your primary communication tool. Bit of background on me before I get into it. So I've been using Asana since 2012. I actually started using Asana when I was working in a marketing role at an e-commerce company here in New Zealand. A bit like a lot of companies, I'm sure a lot of people attending today can relate. We had tried a number of different project management tools. We couldn't really find anything that worked for us. I found Asana. It wasn't really part of my job. I was working in marketing, but the productivity geek that I am embraced it, and I figured out how to use it. Long story short, we transitioned our company of about 50 people over to using Asana, and it became the primary tool we used to manage our work and communicate as a team. My boss at the time paid me a bonus for that. It really transformed and improved how the company operated. So it was a couple of years later, I was trying to start my own business. I was thinking, what can I do? How could I earn some revenue? And I thought, hey, maybe there are other businesses who need help with Asana as well. And so that's my sort of Asana origin story, if you like. So I started my consulting business in 2015. To date, we've worked with about over 500 clients all over the world. I say here, trust me, I've seen it all. We've seen Asana accounts of all different shapes and sizes. So if you think, oh, my account's messy, I'm not doing things well, don't worry. We've seen it all before, and you're not alone. My big passion is I love helping teams to save time and get more done with Asana. I mean, yeah, we love helping show people how to use the tool, but what we care about most is how do we improve your business through Asana We also help companies with Pipedrive, which is a sales CRM. And we also do quite a lot of work with Zapier. We do a lot of automation work as well. And ultimately, I believe that good systems are essential for growth. I run a pretty lean operation here. There's a few of us on the team. I think by having good tools, good technology and systems in place, that has really helped us to grow and scale without having to add too many people into the machine. Here's a picture of me at the Asana headquarters in San Francisco. This was in 2019, pre-COVID, pre-beard. Yeah, I had the fortunate experience of getting to meet the team and visit the headquarters a couple of years ago, which was real fun. This is what Asana looked like when I started using it in 2012. If you want to post in the chat, if you ever experienced Asana this way, I'm kind of curious who's been on Asana since back in these days. But this is what it looked like back in sort of 2012, at least when I started, before they did a big rebrand to the colorful Asana experience that we have today. But that's what it looked like. Yeah, it was kind of crazy. Yeah, Pierre did. Yeah, you remember. Thanks, Pierre. So today's agenda, as I said, I'm focusing on communication today, using Asana as a communication tool. So I'm going to start by talking about the advantages of using Asana, why I believe Asana is one of the best ways you can manage communication as a team. I'm going to then talk about how to manage behavioral change, because getting your team to migrate their communication from tools like email and Slack and Teams into a tool like Asana, that is a transition, that is a behavioral change that needs to be managed. So I'm going to share some tips on how we can navigate that change. I'll share some how we use the features of Asana, like the comments, the messages, and project updates in order to communicate. So we'll get into the weeds there. I'll do a bit of a demo. I'm going to share some best practices. We've seen sort of the same mistakes coming up again and again and again with the clients that we've worked with over the years. And so I'll share some of the common mistakes that people make and some best practices to make adopting Asana for communication nice and easy. And I'll finish by explaining how other tools fit into the mix, how Asana works alongside things like your email, Teams, Slack, tools like that. So that's today's agenda. Let's get into it. And yeah, any comments or questions you have along the way, I've got the chat open, so feel free to post your questions in as we go. So let's start by talking about why would we use Asana for communication? What's the benefit in making Asana your team's primary channel for communication? The first benefit I like to reference is that if Asana is the tool where your work lives, I think if adopted well and set up correctly, everything your team is working on lives in Asana. All your projects, all your work, it's where we see everything that we're doing. So if that's where your work lives, then it makes sense to use it for our communication as well. Instead of having to switch back to email or to Slack or Teams, why not do everything in one tool? And that way we can keep our conversations organized by task and the work rather than recency. What I mean here is that tools like Slack and Teams, and I'm picking on them a little bit, and Slack and Teams, by the way, there is a role for these tools in your company, which I'll talk about, but I'm picking on them a little bit because these kinds of tools prioritize recency. If you have a channel in Slack, for example, you generally see the more recent conversations and comments first. And so if you ever want to go back and find, what did I talk about with Marquis last week? You sort of have to scroll up through this thread or go back in your email and go and find those old conversations. Whereas in Asana, our conversations are organized by task and by project. So when I sit down to work on a specific task or I'm looking at a project, I've got all my conversations in one place and I can see what are we talking about related to this work that we're doing. Another major benefit is it really forces your team to adopt a task-centric mindset, because one of the main ways we communicate in Asana is through the comments, task comments, which I'll be showing you in a little bit. Now, task-centric mindset. Sorry, I've just mind blank for a second. So sorry, what I was going to say is, in order to post a comment, you have to post that on an actual task. So it forces you to think about, well, what is the appropriate task where I want to add that comment? And if there isn't an already existing task, it's going to kind of force you to create one in a way. So Asana is kind of always prompting you to think about what is the work you're trying to move forward, or maybe you need to create a new task. And so it kind of shifts the way your team thinks to being more task-centric and more geared around getting work done. I find this facilitates quicker decision-making. This is actually one of the things my boss, for that story I told you earlier, when we adopted Asana about 10 years ago at the company I was working at, he really noticed that we were making decisions quicker. With email, it's less, there's a lot of back and forth in email and Slack and Teams. It's not always clear who's doing what and when things are due. But by having conversations inside of our tasks, inside of our projects, we're always reminded about what are we actually trying to achieve and how do we move the work forward. And so naturally, decisions start to get made quicker. And finally, I find communication in Asana is less disruptive. It's more asynchronous, where tools like Slack, Teams, and even email can be quite disruptive. You get these notifications throughout the day. Asana's inbox, I find, is a little less disruptive. We still need to check on it a few times a day, but I find because it's not so much a real-time communication tool, by communicating in Asana, you have more time to actually do deep, meaningful work throughout the day, and you're getting fewer distractions. So that's why we would communicate in Asana. Now, how do we manage this change? As I said at the start, changing your team's behavior and getting them to adopt a new habit does take a little bit of time. So if anyone's struggling, if you're new to Asana, if you're struggling to get your team to fully adopt Asana right now, don't worry, this is completely normal and expected because we're really changing the way that your team works. So I always like to start the conversation about why we're using Asana. What we see time and time again with the clients that we've worked with, here's a story I hear all the time, is that people will tell me, I've been using Asana for about 6 months or a year. We kind of use it, but it's sort of being half adopted. Some people use it, some people don't. And so we're having to revert back to email to keep up to date with what's going on. If that's an experience that you've had, definitely post in the chat. Let me know. I'm kind of curious how many people fit into that category here. And so I think this is the result of, firstly, we see a lot of business owners or whoever's leading the charge with Asana kind of just gives Asana to the team. And there's no really formal rollout or explanation as to why are we even using this tool. So we have to start by explaining to the team, why are we using Asana and how is it actually going to improve the way we work and make our lives better? And we can cite things like it's going to improve the visibility of our work. We can see who's doing what. Maybe that's going to mean fewer meetings. So I always like to explain to a team first why we're using Asana and how it's going to make their lives easier. If we start by setting the expectations and explaining the benefits of this tool, we're really going to improve the commitment and the buy-in from the team, because now it feels less like a chore to use, and it's going to feel more, people are going to actually feel excited to use it. Another tip that we always share in terms of managing this change is, especially if you're new to Asana, if you haven't deployed Asana officially yet, maybe you're still signing up and playing with it, you're still doing that initial build out, I recommend having a go live date when you're going to say to your team, right, on this day, let's say 15th of August, we're going live with Asana. This is the day where we expect everyone to have Asana open on their computer. We expect people to be checking their inbox and using this as their communication tool instead of email or Slack. So having an actual, sounds really simple, but an official go live date where we're officially turning Asana on can really help to draw, sort of draw that line in the sand and say to the team, look, this is it. It's happening now. A couple of other key things to mention here. It's important to share best practices about how to use other tools, which we will talk about later today as well. Because Asana is another tool in our tool belt, alongside email, Zoom, Slack, Teams, it's important to clarify when we should communicate using Asana versus email versus Slack and Teams, so that there's no confusion in the team. What we really want to avoid are situations where, like I've got this little image down here, where we've spread communication out over multiple tools. So I've said here, Warwick, can you give me an update on this? And he's posted an update in Slack. So we don't want to spread out communication over too many tools. We really want to share when to use Asana and how the other tools fit in. Like I said, we'll talk about that later today. And finally, it's very common to face sometimes resistance from the team about adopting a tool like Asana. Also, people are just kind of sometimes stuck in their ways, and they've built habits for years about using email and other tools. So a nice, useful way to pull people back into Asana, especially if you get like an email from someone, is we do this quite a lot, is we forward emails to this address, x@mail.asana.com. And so if somebody does email you, let's say Marquis, he's forgotten how to use Asana, which I know won't happen. So he emails me. I'm going to forward my email into Asana. I can then tag Marquis in that task that gets created. And I can say, hey, Marquis, here's your email in Asana, just so you can see sort of how I would have created this as a task. And now we can continue the conversation there. So just sort of a really nice, subtle way that we can bring people back into Asana. So those are some tips on managing change. And now I really want to get into the weeds a little bit and talk about the main ways or the different features of Asana that we can use to communicate. There's kind of three main areas that I like to focus on. There is the task comments. This is generally what we use most of the time. I would say in my team, comments is probably the feature which, yeah, it's probably where about 90% of our communication takes place is via task comments. We can also post messages. If our communication is not related to a specific task, we can post messages in the project, the team, or privately. And finally, we can share project updates, which is really useful for reporting as well. So let's get into a bit of a demo and take a look at some of these features. So I'm going to stop this screen and we'll go to my browser. Marquis, any questions or anything you want to add while I'm just getting my screen sorted there?
Yeah, that we have lots of comments coming in. We'll save some of them, but there was one really important one. They said, when are we going to see a YouTube live Asana battle, Paul versus Marquis? And I said, I'm ready any day, anytime.
Yeah, let's do it. An Asana battle. How would that work? Yeah.
I don't know. We can have a use case, and whoever builds it better, the crowd can vote. We'll figure something out.
I like it. Let's make it happen. Yeah, cool.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Alex, we'll use you as an example. Yeah, let's build out someone's projects. Yeah. All right. So communicating in Asana. So as I said, comments on tasks. This is probably what my team and I use, I would say, about 90% of the time. So your work obviously lives in your projects. You've got your projects on the left. This is just my demo account. So I don't actually have Apple as a client, unfortunately, maybe one day. And so if I click on one of these tasks, every task is a separate area where you can have a conversation. So this task here, the book voiceover actor, down the bottom, this is where we can communicate for this specific task. If I go to this one underneath, design new Apple logo, you can see there's some comments down here. So each task is a separate thread. And that's really good because it means that if I'm following up about a specific piece of work, so Jarvis in this case is working on this new Apple logo. If I want to follow up about this specific work and find out where it's at, what do we need to do next? All our communication related to getting this work done happens here inside the comments. Now, before you post a comment, in fact, before you make any change to a task, it's really important to look right at the bottom here. Hopefully you can see my mouse there, at the collaborators. Collaborators are people who think of them as being CC'd on the task. So at the top, Jarvis is the assignee. Jarvis is the person responsible for doing this task. It's ultimately his work to do. It's on his task list. Jarvis is my robot, by the way. I use Zapier to automate some task creation. So Jarvis is not a real person. He's my Zapier robot that creates tasks for me. So he's not a real person. And I borrowed that name from Iron Man. I love the idea of having a personal Jarvis. So Jarvis is my Iron Man assistant in Asana, if you're wondering where that name came from. So Jarvis is the assignee. I'm also a collaborator because you can see here, I created this task. Now, I can add other collaborators. Let's add Warwick in here. So I can just type his name. And that means not only will the comments that I post be shared with Warwick as well, but any other updates to this task, if Jarvis completes the task, if we make a change to it, all collaborators will be notified. This is really important to wrap your head around, because when we get to the inbox in a little bit, we want to, you can follow or unfollow your tasks, or sorry, leave the task. And that's going to allow you to control what you get notified about. So if you get looped in on a conversation and there's two people going back and forth on that conversation, you can actually remove yourself from the conversation by leaving the task down here. It's a bit like, you know how with an email, sometimes you get looped into an email conversation and there's maybe 10 different people in the conversation and two people are going back and forth. We've all been in that situation, and it's sort of like you're sitting there thinking, why am I still in this email conversation? The great thing about having your communication in Asana is you get the ability to remove yourself from the conversation. So before you do anything to the task, but especially before you post a comment, take a look at the collaborators down here. And so when I post my comment, I can say, hey, Jarvis, how's this task going? If I post my comment, Jarvis is going to get notified, of course, because he's the assignee, but also Warwick in this case, because he's a collaborator on this task. Now, when you do have multiple collaborators on the task, it can be useful to use the @mention feature. So if I type the @ symbol, very much like how it works on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, I can @mention someone. So let's mention Lindsay. So here's Lindsay on my team. You'll actually notice Lindsay is not a collaborator yet. She's not one of the collaborators here. So if I post my comment and I @mention her, she now gets looped into the task as a collaborator. She is now going to get future updates about this task. So that @mention feature is a really nice way to loop new people into the conversation. It's also a useful way of directing your comment at a specific person. If we have multiple people involved in this conversation, I can @mention those specific people to sort of specify who I'm talking to or who I need feedback from.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just looking at the comments. Yeah.
Yeah. Laura Lee has a question. I'm going to hand her the mic for a second.
Yeah.
We can bring her on the stage. Hi, Laura Lee.
Hi. Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh my goodness. I did not think that you were going to actually listen to me. Okay. So my team definitely struggles with communicating at all in Asana. We use mainly Slack, and a lot of times, like, we just recently found a task that was super overdue because the content creator actually made comments, really important ones, in the task, and no one paid attention to it. So I was just wondering, do you think it's because we're just trained to look at Slack only? Or is it because we're like, maybe we need to turn on notifications? Or is there something about the Asana comments that are just not as noticeable?
Yeah, great question. I would say it could, partly be a case of breaking those old habits. If you've been using Slack for a while, I'd say that's almost certainly a factor. But I see Hassan in the comments said as well, in my experience, people say that the Asana inbox is overwhelming. And I often find that to be the case, that the Asana inbox can feel overwhelming if not managed properly. But I find that usually comments get missed, or people are tasks are being, we're dropping the ball on tasks because people aren't checking that inbox properly. So this is the inbox up here. I'll come back. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But usually I find that's why things get missed, is people aren't checking the inbox, or the inbox is too overwhelming. And so that's when those comments tend to slip through the cracks. So I'll come back. I'll talk about that inbox in a little bit, because that's a really crucial part of Asana to be checking to make sure that those comments don't get missed. Yeah. So I'm just checking the comments. Yeah, inbox 0, definitely. Yeah. So as I was saying, we use the comments down here to comment and follow up and discuss specific tasks that we're working on. We can @mention people. And as you can see here on the right-hand side, you can like people's comments as well. This is a really useful way, actually. When I first saw this, I was like, oh, that's kind of fun, but I don't know if it's useful. Now I actually think it's a great feature because liking a comment is a great way of showing someone, I've seen your comment. Rather than having to respond and say, great, thanks, whatever, I can like your comment. Fun fact, actually. So one of the co-founders of Asana, Justin Rosenstein, who was one of the early employees at Facebook, Justin invented the like button. If you've ever watched the movie, I think it's The Social Dilemma on Netflix, he features in that and he talks about this a little bit. And it was just a fun way at that time to just show someone you like their comment. And so he invented this feature that we all now use on all sorts of platforms today. And he brought that to Asana when he co-founded Asana along with Dustin Moskovitz, whose name you might recognize from the Social Network movie, Dustin. So that's why we have some of these social features like the at mentioning, the liking. That's why we have this in Asana, is that Justin actually invented this. Yeah. And so I actually, I often suggest when we do trainings with teams, you need to make that a convention or a best practice that everyone adopts on the team, which is if you see someone's comment, you click that like button to show that you've seen it. That way there's no mystery around, you know, have they seen it? Are they going to respond? Are they going to do it? Are they going to respond to my comment? Clicking that like button acknowledges that you've seen it. So that's the first way that we can communicate in Asana, is commenting on tasks. Like I said, probably the feature or the way that we communicate about 90% of the time in my team. The other ways that we can communicate are via messages. So each of your projects has a messages area at the top. So this is where I can post messages which aren't really task specific to the project. So I always want to try and post a comment on a task because we should be following up and communicating at the task level, because that's where we can see who's doing the actual work. So we should always prioritize trying to use a task comment if we can. But sometimes we have just something to share about the project as a whole. And so this is where we can use the messages in the project. So if I click in here, I can say project meeting notes. So maybe we're having a meeting about this project. We're discussing next steps. I'll just put in some dummy text in here. I can type my notes in here, and you can see down at the bottom, this is going to be shared with Jarvis, who is the other member of this project. So he's actually going to get a notification in his inbox. And now I've posted this message to the project messages board. So this is not a feature I use that much, or it's generally something I find we use more for project level discussion or things like meeting notes that aren't specific to any one specific task. So we can post those messages either at the project level, or if you go to one of your teams. So here's my Asana demo team. You can see our team members here. I can also post a message to the team. So I'm buying coffee, you know, place your order before 10 a.m. So I'm going to share this to the team. You can see down at the bottom, it's getting shared with the other members of the team. And so now everyone in the team has received this message. So this is sort of another higher level way of communicating. We're not communicating on the task. We're not communicating at the project. We're now at the team level. And so this is kind of akin to, in Slack, you've got channels. You often have channels for different departments, or you have channels for different areas of work. That's often what I compare messages to in Asana, is you can use messages and you can post a message on the team or the project, similar to how channels work in Teams or Slack. You can as well also just share a private message. So if I click the create button at the top left, I can post a message and I can say, let's book a meeting, and I can share this with somebody on my team. And so I'll just put some text in here. I can now just send this private message to Warwick. I'm sending it as a message because there's not a task to complete here, but I do want to just message him something, and I want to keep my communication in Asana. I don't want to have to go back to Slack or email. So I can just send Warwick this private message, and that's now going to go to him, and he'll be notified in his inbox. So those are messages. I'll just check the chat. Any questions on messages before I talk about project updates? Yeah. Cool. I think we're all good. The third and final way that we can communicate in Asana is using project updates. Now, Marquis, I'm kind of curious on your side what you think about this, but I feel that often teams don't use the project updates feature enough. It's often a feature we just don't see people using, which is a shame because I find it a really powerful feature. Yeah, not sure what your experience is there.
It's true. Yeah. When I overview status updates, it's either they're not using it or they weren't aware of it, or they're looking for a way to better communicate and to level set with all their team members. And yeah, it's one of those things that I think is just low hanging fruit that is underutilized.
Yeah, no, definitely what we've seen as well. So the status updates, you'll find at each of your project, you can set the status of your project up here. You can also do this from the overview page. So this is my project overview. On the top right, I can set my status over here. So I'm including this in communication because it is a useful way of communicating updates to the team. And actually, I find if you use the project updates, it's a great way of having less meetings. We all want to have less meetings, fewer meetings if we can. Often we have meetings to discuss how's the project going, what are we doing, what have we done, what are we doing next, where are we at? That's often why we need to have meetings. This project updates feature, if we use it properly, is a great way to cut back on how often we need those meetings. So I can set my status of the project as on track if things are going well, if we're hitting our deadlines. I can say at risk if we're maybe falling behind a little bit, but we're not in danger yet. Off track would generally be, yeah, we're really behind, we're dropping the ball. This project, we need to kind of catch up a little bit on this project, or on hold, as it sounds like if we're putting the project on hold, or I can mark the project as complete. So for now, I'll just say, you can see this is the most recent update here. The iPhone 15 launch has been delayed. Sorry, guys, if you're trying to get the iPhone 15, it's going to be a few more months. But I've got some good news. We're actually back on track now. So back on track. Whoops. Can't type today. Back on track for iPhone 15 launch. I'll put a little emoji in here. Now, when I post my update, Asana's giving me some prompts. It's giving me some sections here that I can fill in to kind of discuss how the project is going. So in this summary section, I can write a general summary about how the project's going, but I can also comment on specific areas. Like I've created this section here called production. If I want to write specifically about how production is going, I can type in here. I can talk about what's going well, or maybe I'll add a new section here. What do we need to do next? I can comment on the next steps. And actually, Asana's given me on the right-hand side some helpful highlights that I can bring in. So if I want to show incomplete tasks by assignee, I can bring in this highlight and it's going to show kind of the tasks and who on the team is doing those. And so I can customize this project update and I can explain to the team how we're going, what we need to do next. And as you can see at the top, this is going to get shared with Jarvis and Lindsay, who are the other members of the project. And now I will click post. So firstly, the members of the project now get a notification in their inbox about this new status update. You can see on the right-hand side, we've now, the most recent update is reflected up here. And if you use portfolios, which is a business feature, if I go to my portfolio here, you can see here are my client projects that I'm working on, and I can see my status updates here. I can see which projects are on track. So number one, this is a really useful exercise to go through on a weekly basis to just sort of evaluate and think about how is the project going. But it's a very useful way of communicating those updates to the team and reducing the need to have meetings to discuss the project.
Hey, Paul,
Yes.
do you want to switch over to the QA tab under the main chat? We've got some questions here.
Oh, yeah.
I'll bring some up onto the screen because I think we can group some of them, but a lot of questions are coming through on just best practices around migrating people from Slack and Teams into Asana, and then notifications and managing the inbox. Can we share best practices around maybe those two functions?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just looking at my slides for my notes here. Yeah, let's go to that inbox because I said I would come back to that. And sorry, I was on the messages tab, so sorry I've missed some of those questions.
No,
but let's talk about that inbox. So the inbox in Asana, actually, I'm going to go to my main account now. So the inbox in Asana is where you get notified about any updates to tasks or projects that you are a collaborator on. So if you remember what I said earlier, down the bottom here of your tasks, you can see I'm a collaborator on this specific task. That's why I have been notified about this task in my inbox. Now, we had the comment earlier from someone that said the inbox, I think it was Hassan, said the inbox can be very overwhelming, which is true, especially if I'm sure a lot of people here, you might be the Asana champion of your team. We call you, by the way, your title is the Chief Asana Officer. My goal is to popularize that title. If you are the Chief Asana Officer of your team, chances are you're probably creating a lot of tasks and a lot of projects. And by default, you will be a collaborator on any task that you create, which is going to mean all those tasks that you've created, all that great work you've done, you're now going to get notified about all the updates to those tasks. So the first great way to reduce the amount of noise and overwhelm of this inbox is to remove yourself as a collaborator from a task. So here's a notification here. Actually, let's go to the bottom first. I like to deal with first in, first out. So I check my inbox a couple of times a day. I generally go to the bottom first because those are the older comments. You can see this one was from yesterday. Now it brings up the task on the right-hand side. And if I no longer want to receive updates about this task, I can leave the task down here. So like I said before, if there are a couple of people going back and forth or somebody's updating the task quite often, you can remove yourself as a collaborator. That means you will no longer get updates about that task. So just be careful, obviously, if you are going to remove yourself, be happy that you're not going to get any future updates. Another quick tip actually to reduce the amount of noise you get in your inbox is if we go back to, let's go back to one of these projects here. Let's go back to Apple. If you go to the project settings at the top, so I'm up here, this is where I can manage the members of the project. And there are some notification settings for each individual project. Now, when you get added to a project, there are 3 types of updates you can receive. There are status updates. So that's what I showed you before when we set the project status to on track or behind. I generally think it's a good idea to receive those updates. Those are quite useful. Messages, I actually agree. I think messages are useful to receive as well. If somebody posts a message in the project, I think that's useful to see. But this one here, tasks added, this can be a very big offender in terms of notifications in your inbox, because if I have this turned on, if anyone creates tasks in this project, if Lindsay or Jarvis here, if they create tasks in the project for themselves, they're not even assigned to me, I would still get notified about those tasks. And I find this is a very common cause of all those updates coming into your inbox. So if you go to your inbox, you might see notifications like Lindsay has added 10 tasks to the project, which, to be honest, unless they're assigned to me, I don't really need to be notified about. So that would be a setting I would recommend turning off, is disabling tasks added to a project. Now, you can do this at the individual project level. You can customize that at the project level. Or I'll give you a useful hack. If you go to your notification settings, so I'm in the inbox here, and if I go to my notification settings at the very bottom, you can globally turn off the tasks added feature here, or you can manage individual projects as well. I would suggest if your inbox is getting overwhelming, reviewing that setting, because it's a very common cause of large amounts of updates in your inbox. So those are a couple of tips. Just to recap briefly, remove yourself as a collaborator on a task if you no longer need to be a collaborator on the task, especially if you are that Chief Asana Officer on your team. You've created a lot of tasks, probably worth removing yourself from them. And also turning off that setting to be notified about new tasks being added to the project. Now, other best practices with this inbox, and I think we had the question earlier from Laurelie. If the team's not fully grasping communication in Asana and they're still going into Slack, the inbox is a really crucial area to make sure the team are sort of following a couple of best practices. The first of which is make sure you're checking it usually a couple of times a day, sort of in the morning and afternoon is sort of a minimum, but you'll probably start checking it more and more as your team starts to adopt Asana more. So make sure you're checking it regularly. You'll see this little orange dot up the top here next to the inbox. This tells me I have new notifications to go and look at. So I check my inbox a couple of times a day. As I said, I go to the bottom first. I like to deal with the oldest notifications first. once you click on a notification, it's going to bring up the relevant task. So here's the task in question, and it's saying Lindsay's been booked for a call. So that's Jarvis, my robot. He's just notifying me that Lindsay's been booked. So I actually don't have anything I need to do here. I can, if I want, I can comment back and I can respond. And I sometimes do actually. I'll share notes with Lindsay and share updates if I need to. But in this case, there's nothing I need to do. Now, once I've dealt with this notification, the final thing I need to do is to archive it. So I can click this button here, or I can use the E shortcut on my keyboard to archive that notification. And I can't remember who said in the messages earlier, but we want to try and get to inbox 0 every single day with our Asana notifications. So now I'm going to continue going through my inbox. I'm going to deal with each notification, and I'll archive when I'm finished. So here's one from Warwick. Warwick's shared an update here. You can see actually I've already liked this. So I liked his comment to show him that I've seen it. I might just respond and say, great, thanks for the update. Once I've responded, I'm going to click archive. I've dealt with that notification now. I don't need that in my inbox anymore. Asana's telling me about things like Lindsay's completed that task. That's great. I can now go and review this task if I need to, or if it's not completed, I can reopen the task. But in this case, what I might do is just put a little celebration down here. You might have noticed recently, Asana's kind of redesigned their appreciation. So what should we choose? Let's do a unicorn for Lindsay. She can get a unicorn. Definitely make sure you're using that feature. And then again, I'm going to archive my notification once I'm done. So I'll continue like this. I'll just archive these all now. And so we want to get to this. This is where we want to get to during the day, is inbox 0. This means that I've dealt with all of my notifications now. I've responded to everything. I've triaged and dealt with all of those incoming notifications. This also means that when new notifications come in, it's really clear that they're new and they haven't been dealt with. We often find that people struggle with the inbox, or comments slip through the cracks, usually because people are not archiving their notifications. And so the new stuff coming in gets muddled up with all the old stuff, and you sort of lose track of where you're at. So the best practices are check the inbox a couple of times a day, archive your notifications as you go. If your team can adopt that habit, it's actually very simple. It's going to be much more likely that they will adopt Asana successfully, and comments are going to get responded to in a timely manner. I'll just pause there. Marquis, let me know what questions I should go to next.
Yeah, I'm going to start grouping some of these. So one of them is going to be around collaborators and then notifications. So how can you automatically add collaborators to a task? And then if you're getting too many notifications, how can you then remove yourself from the task? So that will be one that we can talk about. And then we'll look at, someone asked, can you tell me more about x@mail.asana?
Oh, yeah.
And then the Slack Google integration. So that can probably be the same one.
Yeah. So in terms of removing yourself as a collaborator, let's see if I can get my archive going here. Here we go. So let's just bring back this notification. So by the way, I should have mentioned earlier, at the top of your inbox, you can always access your archived notifications. So here are the old ones that I archived before. If I go back to my activity tab, this is my main inbox, my unread items. And so to remove or to stop receiving those updates, you can either click the little X down near your profile icon down here, or you can leave the task. So that's how you'll remove yourself if you no longer want to receive updates. You can actually, if you want to use the search at the top, you could do an advanced search. And here's a useful one. If you do a search to look for tasks that are assigned to not me, and collaborators are me, so I'll put my name in here, and maybe let's just look at anything that's incomplete. And just for argument's sake, because otherwise I'll create a big report here, it'll probably take a while to load. I'm just going to say due within the next 7 days. I can do a report now of all the tasks I'm a collaborator on. These are all assigned to people like Lindsay, Judy, Warwick on my team. I can, if I want, if I select a bunch of these, so I'm going to click on the task at the top. If I hold my shift key and then select the one at the bottom, I've now bulk selected all of those tasks. And I can remove myself as a collaborator here. So if I want to remove myself from all of those tasks at once, using the search here is one way to just find all those tasks. I could also do this from the project. So if I have, let's say, built out this project, I'm going to be the collaborator on everything because I created all those tasks. Again, I can shift click to bulk select those tasks in the project, and I can remove myself as a collaborator in bulk. So I don't have to go through one by one.
What if it's a recurring task, Paul? Is it the same action then? You just remove yourself from that original task?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah. Just remove yourself from the next recurring task. And with recurring tasks, when you complete the recurring task, Asana basically duplicates the task and sets the new due date. So removing yourself from the next recurring task means that you won't be a collaborator on the next one that appears.
You break that cycle.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And then there was the question about x@mail.asana, and then talking about the Slack and Google Chat integrations, if you know anything about those.
Yeah, let's do the x@mail.asana. So if you go to your tasks up here, you see at the top under this menu, there's an option to add tasks via email. Just so I don't have to switch my screens, I'll stay on Asana. But essentially, the way this feature works is if I receive an email, I can forward the email to this address, x@mail.asana.com. As long as I'm forwarding it from this, if my email that I'm forwarding from and my email in Asana are the same, so I'm paul@paulminers.com and my Asana is tied to paul@paulminers.com, Asana then recognizes, right, this email is coming from Paul. So that's why we all get to use the same address. It kind of works like magic that way. Asana will then convert the task into convert the email into a task. So let me just see if I can find one here. I'm just in my email now. I'm just going to forward this to my Asana, and you can see what that looks like. It'll take a minute to come in, but we'll let that process. So the subject of the email, as you can see here, will become the task name. The body of the email and any attachments will go into the task description. And when you forward that task, you can even CC teammates to add them as collaborators. So if I go back to my tasks here, hopefully that's come in. So here we go. This is the email that I just forwarded to Asana. So this invoice that I've received for $257. You can see here's the body of the email in my task description. And you can see it's actually brought in that logo from the signature, which is a bit of a pain. I'll delete that. But here's that invoice that was attached. So just by forwarding that email to this address, it puts the task on my tasks list. So it's not in a project at the moment. It just goes onto my tasks here. I can, if I want, then I'll put this in a project. So let's put this in business, and I can put this into accounting, and I'm going to pay this tomorrow. So just like that, I've converted an email into a task, which I've now assigned to myself, and I've put a date on it so I know when I need to take action on this. So really useful way of spending less time in email and converting those emails into tasks. And then, we had the final question about the Slack integration. I don't really have it available to show instantly here, but the way the integration works is you can install the Asana app into your Slack account. What that's going to mean is that you can receive notifications from updates in Asana in Slack. Now, Marquis, I'm kind of, again, curious what your view is on this. My personal view is that I generally don't recommend using this feature or using the notifications feature, because I find it just more efficient to deal with your Asana notifications in the Asana inbox. That's where you can reply, you can quickly make changes to tasks. I find it easier to deal with the notifications here natively in Asana rather than having them appear in Slack. And if you've adopted Asana as your primary tool for communication anyway, you probably don't need to receive notifications in Slack. So I'm not a huge fan of that part of the integration. The Slack integration also, the other ability that it has is if you do receive a message in Slack, you can click on that message and you can add that message. You can create a new task from the message, or you can add that message as a comment to an existing task. So that can be quite useful. If there is a conversation taking place in Slack that we want to have in Asana, I can move that into Asana. So I do find that can be useful. But the notifications part, personally, I recommend just living in Asana. Yeah, Marquis, not sure what your views are there.
I totally agree with you there. I think we have to just agree what that tool is. Alex had the question here. Any thoughts, recommendations on how, key members of a volunteer nonprofit board, sorry, any thoughts on integrating key members of a volunteer nonprofit board into Asana, or is there a way to integrate Slack Asana better? So I think the use case that Alex is talking about, what I see often is we have volunteers or contractors that we don't want in Asana, right? For whatever reason, maybe we, haven't figured out privacy and whatnot. But then there are people inside of Slack that we do need to communicate with. So I don't love it either. I think we need to agree on one, but maybe are there any best practices then on how we can use the two tools to integrate with each other?
Yeah, I think if you have contractors or people who aren't in Asana, working in Slack, in order to communicate in Asana, they do need to have like a license essentially, in order to be able to respond in Asana. So if you are working with them primarily in Slack, I'd say that probably is a good time to then use that integration. So you can have the conversation in Slack and then copy those messages into Asana. Maybe not all of them, but if there's a relevant, like, here's the message where we decided this is what we're going to do, or here's the next action step, copying that into the Asana task that's relevant so that we can kind of at least see a bit of a, centralize that final decision into Asana. That's probably kind of how I would do it. Because yeah, you if you have collaborators, outside collaborators that you're communicating with, they really would need to be in Asana to use the conversation features. But that actually is something to consider, is when you invite outside guests into your account, rather than adding them to your team in Asana, you could even add them either to a specific project. If we only want that outside person to have access to that one project, you can add them at the project level, or you could even just assign them a task. So we do this. We have clients that do this. If they want to add their clients into their Asana, they can assign tasks for, this is what we need you to do. And that way the client, by only assigning them that one task, the client can only see that task. They can't see the other details in the project. So that could be something to consider, as bringing your outside collaborators or clients into Asana as guests, and seeing if they're open to managing communication there.
Yeah, you won't know until you try.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring up one more question here, Paul, and then we'll let you do your closing remarks to the group here. Any guidance on use of approvals versus regular check marks? So tasks versus approval.
Yeah, let me go back to my screen and show what this looks like for the people that aren't familiar. So let's go here. So if I go to one of my projects, let's go back to Apple. So most tasks, when you create a task, you've got the regular mark as complete button at the top, which is a simple way of showing if the task is done or not. Now, we can also create approval tasks. So let's say we have a task for, actually, no, let's do it in that same task. Because actually, how I usually recommend using approvals is as subtasks. So let's create a subtask down here. Approve new Apple logo. So go into this subtask now. In the task menu at the top, I can mark this as an approval. Now, I think, Marky, you can confirm this is a business feature. So you've got the free version, you've got premium, and then business. I'm 90% sure this is a business feature. Marky, can you confirm?
The approvals, I can't confirm that. I feel like it might be premium.
Okay, we'll need to double check. Maybe if you could double check while I'm talking. I thought it was business. Maybe sometimes they shuffle features around, so maybe it's changed. But anyway, now I have marked this as an approval. You can see I've got a few options up here. So instead of just marking the task as complete, I can approve the task, I can request changes, or I can reject. Now, the important thing to wrap your head around when using this feature is that no matter what option I choose,
business and up.
Oh, it is business. Okay.
Yeah.
So no matter what option I choose, that is going to close out the task. So if I say changes requested, let's go back to the parent task here. You can see this subtask is technically considered done. We've closed the subtask. And the result of that is that we requested changes. So this is why I often suggest using approvals at the subtask level, is so that, right, when this person says, approve new logo, we're going to request changes, you can post some comments in here and say, let's try a banana instead. So you can post the changes that you've requested down here. We can then make those changes. And then what I would probably do is then create a new subtask, approve banana logo. I would then make this one an approval as well. So we'll go up here, approval. And then we say, yep, we love the banana idea. We're going to go with the banana going forward. Let's approve that. And so now we sort of have this, like, I think it's a nice way of tracking revisions and history. So we've gone through, a number of rounds of approval. We did round 1. We requested changes. We then approved on round 2. So that's why I generally suggest keeping those approvals at the subtask level. It's sort of a bit easier to keep track of everything. But yeah, using the approvals, just keep in mind that whatever option you choose, you are closing out the task. So you do need to post if you're requesting changes or rejecting, you need to comment back with your reasoning and then potentially create a new subtask if you're going to go through another round of approvals.
Awesome.
Any other questions we didn't have? Hassan, since Paul is a Zapier expert, I wanted to know if there's a way we can send updates and comments as email to external users. Yes, I think you can actually. Let's just quickly go. Sorry, I'm just going to Google this quickly on the fly. Here we go. So Zapier, for those that aren't familiar, Zapier is a very powerful automation tool, separate piece of software, and it basically connects different programs like Asana together. It works on a trigger action system. So for example, here are the triggers being something that happens in Asana, which we can use to start an automation. So completing a task or new story. Actually, Hassan, this is the one we would use. So if a story, I don't know why they call them stories, they mean comments really. If we post a comment on a task, that trigger could then start an automation. Now, we can perform actions in Asana. We can create subtasks. We can create new projects. We can update tasks. There's quite a lot we can do, actually. But we can also mix and match actions from other services. So if I use Gmail, I can say, right, when that story or comment is posted in Asana, I could send an email using Gmail. And so I can then take the contents of that comment, put that into an email, and send that to the client. Now, I'd probably want to include a bit of logic there to make sure that I'm not sending every single comment to the client. We don't want that. So I'd probably need to check for some tag or custom field, something to make sure that we do want to share that comment. But theoretically, yeah, Hassan, using Zapier, you could be sharing comments from Asana externally via Zapier.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Paul, thank you so much. We could talk probably for the rest of the day or evening, but we're gonna close it there. I'd love to just hear from you, closing remarks, just last thoughts, tidbits for the group today.
Yeah, I'll just mention a couple of key points that I didn't come back to, but in terms of how Asana fits in with other tools and just sort of my best practices there. Firstly, if you're like me, and I'm sure Marquis as well, Asana is my team's primary tool for communication. So how we recommend email fits in is if we are communicating with clients who obviously they're not in our Asana account, we still use email for communicating with external parties. But internally as a team, if we're just going back and forth about the work that we're doing, all of that lives in Asana. So Asana is for our internal task and project-based communication. Email is for communicating with external contacts. And as I said earlier, I still think there's a role for Teams and Slack in your organization if you have these tools. I think those tools can be quite good for more of those real-time conversations. So if I'm messaging Marquis and we need to go back and forth a bit quicker to sort of, our conversation's a bit more urgent, we might do that in something like Slack or Teams versus Asana, which is a bit more asynchronous because Marquis and I are only checking our inboxes every couple of hours. If I want that more instant real-time update, I might message Marquis in Slack instead. So that's generally where something like Slack and Teams would still play a role, is for those real-time conversations. And I'll just close out, if it's okay, sharing a little bit more about the services we offer for those that are interested. So if you are interested in working with me and my team, how we like to work is I have a support program called Master Asana. Our philosophy, if you like, is that I want every team to have an Asana expert on their team. And I don't mean me, because I can't be everywhere. So the way we offer support is we want to teach you or somebody on your team how to be your team's Asana expert. Like I said, we call you the Chief Asana Officer. And so that's the goal of my Master Asana program. Maybe I'll share a link in the chat, or I'll follow up with Marquis on the best way to share this. But I'll share a link to my website when we're done, where you can take a look. We basically offer private consulting sessions, so you can meet with me and my team on Zoom, where we can help you with building out your account. We train you on specific features. We can also run training sessions for your team as well, if you just want an outside expert doing that for you. So we offer private consulting sessions. I also offer I do a weekly group coaching call every Monday, US time, Tuesday here in New Zealand. This is quite nice because I have a number of clients each week connecting with me. Great way to just get access to me each week. If you have questions or need help, you can join my group call. My YouTube channel, there's lots of good stuff there, but my full online course, my Master Asana program, includes more detailed video training about how to use Asana, how to take advantage of all those features, how to onboard your team properly. So it's a nice resource to reference during your build outs. And I won't go through all of this, but we have a Slack community. You can connect with me there. We've got project templates to help you build out your account. And if you are interested in Zapier, we've got some pre-built Zaps to help you automate more of your workflows and tap Asana into other tools and things that you're using. So yeah, I'll find the best way to share a link to that page when we're done. But if you are interested in working with us and checking out our program, we'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. Yeah, and go check out Paul's stuff. I mean, we have great minds here creating great tools. We heard of Bastian's tools earlier and the things that he can do. Go check them out. Go check out Paul. Carrie shared some amazing insights earlier and how she works. So go check out these specialists. If you resonated with anything today, we encourage you to connect with them. Thank you so much, Paul. Just one thing I want to share from this, someone that I know a long time ago said that email is your external to-do list, and people put things on there they need from you. Your My Tasks is your internal to-do list, the things that you need to do. And Paula in the chat, said that My Tasks is, same thing, things you need to do, whereas your inbox is things that you need to know as well. So as we're talking about just consolidating communication and thinking more about it, I think that's a great way to summarize it. Paul, I'm so glad you could make this. Thanks so much for getting up early and starting your day with us and sharing all of this. So good to have you here, man.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for putting this together, Marquis.
Of course, we'll definitely have to do it again, and we'll schedule that YouTube Asana off, or whatever we're going to call it.
Yeah.
We'll figure something out. Amazing. Well, thank you, everybody. What an incredible day it was. And with that, I want to conclude our very first Asanathon. I would like to say thank you to each and every one of you for participating, for engaging, and making this event something really special for me. Like I said, I've been thinking about this and dreaming about this for a long time. And so thanks for bringing your energy, your curiosity, and your passion, because all of that really fueled all the discussions and the demos and the deep dive sessions that we had today. A massive shout out to our incredible speakers, Joshua Zirkle, Paul Miners, you just heard from, Carrie Hoffman, Bastien Sebman, Nadia Martinez, who shared their expertise, their knowledge, and their time with us. And of course, a big thanks to our sponsors, the System Builder Academy and the Asana Together community. They're not going to like me for this, but I've got to thank my team as well. Behind the scenes, Tasby has been working all day. Francis has been here working all day. I don't know if they want to come on the stage real quick or just say hello, but they have helped at everything from the troubleshooting. This morning, when our panel discussion only let in 15 people and people were knocking on the door, they were on the phone and emails with AirMeet trying to troubleshoot. They're sending out emails and social media posts to everybody. So thank you so much. And Tasby for planning all of this. No surprise, we use Asana to do all this. And from when this was just an idea, the planning, the tracking, the monitoring, keeping me aligned, being in touch with all of our guests and putting all this together, I can't thank you enough for making this happen. And congratulations to our leaderboard winners. Who do we have here? Let's see. It was changing in the last chat. We had Hassan coming in the first spot. Jacob, you were dethroned. You're at the number 2 spot, and then Laura Lee in that number 3 spot. So you've all won yourselves Asana templates, and then Hassan, you'll be getting a consultation with me. Maybe you'll pass that off to someone else. Who knows? But thank you so much for being here. And sharing. And if you missed anything today or want to revisit any of the sessions, don't worry. Everything was recorded and will be available effective tomorrow. You'll get emails summarizing everything. All of the links will all be provided to you as well. And we are going to be sending out, this is super important, an email where we want to hear from you. We want to hear feedback. So you're going to get an email with a little quick survey. Please, 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 please do not delete this email. Okay. This is a task that I'm going to put on your email inbox to-do list, or if you can just take the time to give us feedback on what you thought of the event. We want to do this again. We want to know what went right, what went wrong, what we can improve. And maybe one day, if we get good enough at this, we'll be in person together. So please don't delete that email. Take the time, fill out the survey. And lastly, keep the connections going, keep the conversation going. I'm sure you met lots of people. There was some jokes going back and forth in the chat all day. Maybe you met some people in the lounge, in the speed networking. Continue those relationships and keep everything going. But until next time, keep thriving, keep innovating, and keep making a difference. And thank you once again for being a part of Asanathon 2023. I'm signing off for now, but I'll see you at the next event. Bye, everyone.